Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
In today's episode, Jacqueline and I are going to continue our conversation on the topic of daily practice. Last week, we went deep into our own experiences with daily practice and only began to touch on the applications and challenges that may also be relevant to our listeners. So here we go with part 2. And don't worry if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, it's not a prerequisite.
Well, I think we should sort of take a step back and acknowledge that actually we had intended to do an entire episode last week, which would have covered this week and last week, but we got a little bit caught up in our own experiences and sharing our stories. And, you and I have been talking about the significance of experience as teacher. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true that we got caught up in our own stories. And I imagine actually that's from an episode standpoint, it's just the way it has to be sometimes as we sort of honor what's coming up in the moment. But I also think our own experiences are really important to share in depth because they're uniquely ours to share. It's like, as you said, it's this idea of lived versus learned. And that's the way I relate to that is like, we all have this subjective experience in the world or this great mystery. And it's by sharing our subjective experience and learning about others that we can sort of make sense of the world as a whole. And I'm reminded of this. It's like, I think it's like a Buddhist fable where there's, it's three blind men trying to determine what an elephant is. And one's touching the leg and going, well, it's clearly a tree. It's a tree trunk. The other's touching the snout and saying this is clearly a snake, and the other one's touching the belly and saying it's a rock. And it's only when they compare their experience that they figure out it's an elephant. And that's a little bit what we're doing in life.
It's actually a beautiful analogy from the standpoint of, I think what Chris and I are trying to do in part with this podcast is to share really vulnerably and honestly from our own experiences, to invite you to tap into the wisdom that sits within you and your intuition and actually work more with that than we're taught to. We're taught to really look to experts telling us what to do and how to think and how to operate in our lives. And actually, I think in a lot of ways, it's robbing us of our own inherent wisdom. And so much of what Chris and I are doing, both in our personal and professional lives, is working to wake up that wisdom so that you as the listener can really work more with your own knowing than having to defer constantly to an expert opinion. Expert opinions end up becoming prescriptive, and they're really driven by the expert's experience. And as far as we're concerned, the biggest expert out there on your experience is you.
True, yeah. And I even shy away from the word expert because the only thing I've learned is that I don't know anything. So take that for what it is. But okay, so seeing how we're already off topic to start the show, I think I want to stay there a moment longer now. This reminds me that after our last show, we both had a number of questions from listeners, and they had a very similar theme. And it was not at all about the topic, but it was about a particular aspect of our story. And I'm going to generalize this question in that in the last episode, I recounted how we met when I walked into your yoga class for the first time near the depths of my mental breakdown. And I think I'm going to get the question right. It's sort of how on earth would you have wanted to be in a relationship with me at that stage? So why don't you take it away from just when I walk into your class that day? Let's see where it goes. So
just to be clear, I didn't want to be with you in a relationship at that stage.
Yeah, that checks out.
I kind of like the mystery of the whole story, but yes, I will answer your question. When you walked into my yoga class that day, what I saw was a man who was breaking down and breaking open. And I saw it because of your experience, which was you had a huge cathartic reaction in the class, and it was clear that you were moving through something. And as a teacher, my experience of you was that there was huge breakdown happening, which is the most beautiful moment in somebody's life because it means that there's an opening that's possible. And so after class, I came to you just to check in to see if you were okay. And you shared a little bit about what was happening. And I encouraged you to do teacher training, only because for me, in my own experience, teacher training was the most profound personal development exercise that I had done. I never took it to become a teacher. I took it to grow. And I had no idea what your history was or any of really what you were about. So I had no idea in that moment that that was your first yoga class.
Yeah, and it wasn't your teacher's training either, you recommend?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I was teaching at the studio that teacher training was happening. Right. And actually, the truth is after that day, I think I probably saw you 2 or 3 more times in a class, and then I didn't see you for about 2 years. So I really had no idea what happened to you. And to be very honest, I didn't think much about it until you showed up just over 2 years later on my online daily practice. And you looked much healthier and well. And that was it. You joined a big community, and I saw you online. And it wasn't until a couple months after that I got an email from you letting me know that you had done a bunch of different training and that it was training that was very similar to the work that I had been doing for years. And you wanted to pick my business brain about what to do moving forward. And I don't know, it sounded like there was something else in your email. So I asked you if it was really my business brain you wanted to pick, and invited, well, I guess we decided to spend an evening together, and we talked for about 8 hours. In that evening, you shared the entirety, so maybe even a little more than you shared in our last episode.
Well, a lot more.
Yeah. With me about what your experience had been. And I remember sitting there listening to you almost in shock at the level of honesty that you shared with me. And I was really moved by how unmasked you were and how willing you were to be that straight up and honest. And also really moved by the lack of victim in your story. I think I was actually reminded of a time when I was quite young, like maybe in my early 20s after a breakup, and saying to a friend of mine, I don't actually remember if I said it to her or she said it to me, but it was, what you need, Jack, is to be with somebody who can swim in the depths of their darkness and isn't afraid to be there. And I don't really think I ever totally understood what that meant until that evening. And so, I remember after that going for a walk with a teacher of mine, somebody I really admire, and speaking to a few friends and sharing what my experience had been. And every single one of them said, run away, stay away, danger, danger, whatever. And something inside of me was so clear that that was their experience, but mine was very much, I think I knew that night that something big was about to happen for us. And I trusted that. I didn't need anybody else to tell me what they thought. Does that answer your question?
Does. And like, yeah. And I will say from a practical perspective, your friends are giving you amazing advice because like on paper, like it's terrible. And like, again, saved a lot of details of that story. And it's not a story I tell because there's other people involved. And it's that don't have their permission necessarily, but it's a very dark story. And I think I had what amazed me about that night is that I really did actually want to find out about some business stuff too, because I was setting up a website and setting up a yoga studio myself and things like that. But there may be another ulterior motive as well. But when I got asked the question, you were very direct, like, tell me about your background. You went through some stuff. I want to hear more about it. And at that point, I pretty well resigned myself to say, okay, I'm going to tell my story. This has been fun getting to know her, but that'll be the end of it. Um, because that had been my experience over the past almost a year. And I'm going to put some context on that because I think this is important to share with our audience and people that have been through things like this. Is coming from an addiction background, one of the character defects that grabs you in addiction is dishonesty and manipulation. You're doing everything to protect your addiction, whether you know it or not. It's very unconscious, but you're just manipulating everything, telling lies because you're trying to hide your addiction. Your life's falling apart, and you're trapped in this dishonesty in so many aspects of your life. So the cure for dishonesty is absolutely rigorous honesty. That's the path forward in recovery, and it's one I absolutely fully believe in. So I adopted this path of rigorous honesty, which is, you find tremendous success in that in recovery rooms where you're sharing your story with other people who have gone through the same thing, understand the disease, get it. But when you venture outside those rooms and that path of rigorous honesty, it's rarely did I find it met with what I would call success. And in fact, so many instances I'd reconnect with people from my past and I would tell them that story. I could feel the reaction at the time and then be greeted many times with next day a text. Yeah, it's probably best we don't ever talk again, or, I don't want you in my life anymore. And that was a repeated process. And even those who are in my life now and are great supporters, the body language I would feel at the time, and it was okay. But I was, part of this is you got to push through this. And what was amazing is every time I would do that, even though I'd be faced with what it looked like failure and rejection, when I was done, I was like, man, I got through that. And there's something inside me that's growing. And each time I do this and each time I step into this and face that battle. And so when I told the story to Jacqueline and I saved no details in it because I was being asked, I didn't feel 1 ounce of shame, 1 ounce of judgment. I felt nothing but respect and admiration. And man, I'll tell you, it had been a long time since I felt that from somebody, particularly when I was being honest. So it was a pretty incredible experience for me.
For me too. And I think really, if you want to know what I felt, I think I felt reverence. I felt reverence for your ability to be unmasked. And your courage was palpable. And that was incredibly attractive and different. And it made me trust you. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are. Okay, I promise we're going to get back to our topic. Wanted to reset, Jacqueline. As a starting point, can you once again give our listeners an understanding of what we mean when we say daily practice?
Yeah. So, daily practice is something that we commit to consistently over a set period of time. So, it requires an intention, a why for doing a practice. And inevitably, especially if we do practices for long periods of time, that intention or the why manages to shift shape and change. It requires commitment. It requires discipline, and it requires consistency. daily practice can be done over different time periods depending on where you're at. It's something that you can commit to for a week. It's something that you can commit to for 28 days. In our work, it looks like 40 days, 90 days, 120 days. One of the things that I will say about daily practice in general is that the longer the practice is that you commit to, the more likely you will meet up with resistance within you to it. And the longer you stay with it, the more likely you will be to face discomfort that's been sort of under the surface for a long time. And so, careful when you're committing. If you're brand new to daily practice, begin slowly and then work your way up. Daily practice is something that can be done on an individual basis on your own, or you can do it in community. And the last thing I would say is that daily practice can look like all different kinds of things. So it can look like a practice of meditation. It can look like a practice of breath work. It can look like a movement practice like yoga or qigong or dance. It can even look like walking. Journaling, as an example, is another practice. So don't get attached to what the practice is per se, or what technology or whatever it is that you're using. At the end of the day, I'm not sure it matters so much. It's about showing up consistently over time for a set period of time. Is that clear?
Yeah, that was a pretty good summary.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I don't. I think when I move on to maybe tapping into why do we think it works?
Well, it's interesting. You are one of the most disciplined people I know when I listen to your past in terms of the different things that you were able to commit to, whether it was ultra marathons or other pieces of, sporting things that you did. You were committed and disciplined, and yet daily spiritual practice is something that was the last thing that you turned to. Why do you think that is?
Why do you think I committed to that last? Mm-hmm. Oh man. Okay. Well, for one, spiritual practices were certainly being recommended to me by anybody. They really weren't part of my culture growing up. I didn't grow up in a spiritual background. I didn't have friends that were particularly spiritual. I mean, maybe at the margin, some mindfulness was being suggested, maybe some meditation. I had back issues, so people were recommending yoga for stretching, like that type of thing. I didn't have any understanding of how these modalities worked at the time. In fact, if anything, I would have probably said I would call them a woo-woo. Like I was a science guy. I wanted to do science things. I think I was really close-minded in this area, if I'm honest. And if I foolishly look back now and see I prided myself on being an atheist or maybe even agnostic. I think I naively saw religion, and I probably grouped spirituality with religion, as a system of control with zero benefit. And I think I probably looked at and assumed that everyone involved in spiritual practices were just spiritual bypassing because they couldn't handle the real world. I really suffered from a high degree of self-centeredness, and I really overvalued my own thinking. I mean, this is my big learning in life as I went through all my stuff. And I wonder how many of our listeners can actually relate to that worldview, even currently, someone they know, or in the past. So what changed? That stayed in place for a long time. And then I got, as we talked about last episode, just the gift of desperation. And it was a real quick shift when it showed up that I was suddenly exploring like shamanism, psychics, crystal bowls, Reiki. Like it didn't, like, it was like, I tried everything, man. It was a bit of a nutty time. I was still probably looking.
So you went full woo woo.
Oh, I went full woo. I was like, bring it on. I got to the point where all my own stuff wasn't working anymore. And I at least got that. And then I was looking for this sort of, I guess I'd call it a quick fix. And finally, when my own ideas stopped working, the quick fix wasn't working. I had the full surrender, and I just got the faith when I started exploring these things more deeply, that what worked for others could work for me if I committed to them like others had. And I came across a practice that was, I think it's 20,000 years old, maybe older, that people are still doing today. And I just sort of went, hey man, it's got to do something for you if people are still doing it. So I just went all into that, but it was desperation for me. You adopted some of these practices from a much earlier age. Why do you think that's so different than me?
Well, I was surrounded by woo woo. You know what? I grew up similarly to you up until a point. And then my mom at 36 was diagnosed with colon cancer, which metastasized to a lung 5 years later. And she, in her own desperation, looked for everything that she could to help heal her. And she went both the medical route and the alternative route and leaned heavily in both and actually studied to become a natural health practitioner. And I think in a lot of ways I learned from her through osmosis. So I watched what sort of watch her being transformed, and she was being transformed from a woman who was mother and wife. And that was pretty much it. That's how she identified herself, to a very strong, independent woman with her own passions and drives, along with mother and wife. And I watched her heal, and
Mm.
I became really curious about what she was doing. And she was so disciplined and committed to her health and things, it's a silly thing to say, but things like we used to open a bag of chips and we would eat the whole bag of chips. And then I would watch my mom never deny herself the chips, but she became very disciplined about how many she would eat. And many people could say, oh, she became obsessed with her weight, but it wasn't about her weight. What I watched her do was she became, I'll use the word obsessed, but it's not accurate, but she became obsessed with feeling well.
Mm.
And so everything that she did and committed to was to feeling well. And I think in her presence, what I got to experience was the dissonance between the things that I did when I was doing things that were life negating, let's say, and then watching her constantly do things that were life affirming. And I kind of wanted what she had.
Yeah. On a side note, it's pretty incredible. It's the only human being I've ever seen have one potato chip, like literally have one potato chip. It's your mom.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But she'll have her potato chip. Yeah. So, yeah. So I think that was different. And I think that in that process, you know, my whole worldview changed. And so I became really curious about health and wellness. And I got exposed to many, many practices over a long period of time. And discipline and commitment were a huge piece of those. But, if I go back to the question that I asked you, and I kind of ask it to myself, I'd laugh a little bit because I remember doing my graduate degree, and I was actually studying. On some level, I was studying discipline and commitment, and I became very curious about what it was that gets in the way of us being able to commit to ourselves. When discipline and commitment feel so good in terms of what the art of practice actually ends up delivering to us, why is it that we will inherently self sabotage? And I remember sitting and having a really deep conversation with a prof of mine who is, I think he's one of my favorite people actually, because he was so interesting. But I had a conversation with him about that very question. And the conversation ended up moving into me joking around saying maybe ultimately I would do a PhD in the topic because I was so curious. But during that time, I was studying. I had already been deeply involved in Kundalini yoga, and I was studying psychology. And I ended up coming across papers around Kundalini yoga and a technology or a protocol that could be used for treating obsessive compulsive disorder, which at the time, which was about 10 or 15 years ago, was one of the top 4 psychological disorders that people were suffering from. I don't know what the stats are right now. And one of the most debilitating. And I did some research and found that there was a Kundalini protocol that, when committed to daily for an hour, had 4 times the impact of any drug on the market in terms of success. But its uptake was negligible outside of the study. And my curiosity went to why, right? Like, it has no side effects. It only has positive benefits. What's actually stopping people from doing it when the drugs on the market had the side effects and their impact was far less powerful? And the answer was simple. Nobody wanted to commit an hour a day for 15 weeks to do a protocol that would ultimately help them, because we're not taught how to commit to working on ourselves. We're not taught that, we're taught that productivity looks like output. Anything that we do inwardly looks like navel gazing or self-centeredness or being selfish. And, as a kid, when I walked by my mom's room one night when she was ill and I heard her praying, and she wasn't a prayerful woman at the time. Religion was nothing that was a part of my upbringing. And I heard her make a prayer that I will never, for as long as I live, forget. And the prayer was, "Dear God, please allow me to be as selfish as I possibly can, so that I can never blame another for that which I didn't do for myself." And in that moment, I woke up to the significance of being selfish in that way. And being selfish in that definition was, please allow me to do what I need to do to take care of my insides, so that I'm not reacting all over the outside on all of the people in my life, but rather that I'm doing what I need to take care of me. And that for me is about personal responsibility, rather than reactivity. If I do what I need to do to take care of myself, then who I am in the outside world is somebody that creates opening and invitation and wellness, rather than somebody who creates more chaos and drama. And so I think for me, daily practice or self-discipline and inward work became a huge part of what I was about before I even really knew it.
It's so interesting. You reference that, that the research paper when you're doing your psychology degree. So I ended up going back to school and doing my master's in counseling psychology, and I had already had this experiential thing from a daily practice for probably about a year at that point in time. And as I kept going deeper into psychology, I kept my own personal view of it, subjective view of it was, these things in my mind don't add up to the experience that I just had doing this daily practice. And we go through module, different approaches. And outside of Jungian depth psychology, I kept looking at it going, this isn't for me. I'm a teacher of experience of daily practice, because all these mental health challenges that they're talking about here, and I've had many of them and been through them, and I've watched them dissolve, came about from an internal daily practice where I was avoiding the victim blame game. I was avoiding all these other traps that seem to show up in this sort of professional designation. And then I ended up walking away from the whole getting my counseling designation, because I said, I'm just not going to use it. It's not mine to teach. That's for someone else to teach. My experience is going to lead me here, much like that research suggested.
So, you know what, with that, why don't we take a break, and then we'll come back to actually talk about what it is about daily practice that works in that way. Does that sound good?
Sounds great. See you in a minute.
Welcome back. So, I'm going to turn our conversation over to you, Chris. And I'm curious from your perspective why daily practice works. I know that the experts out there have a lot to say about it. Neuroscience has a lot to say about it. But I want to know from your lived experience and from the lived experience of your clients and people in your life, why do you think daily practice works?
I'm going to give you both the practical and the metaphysical, which are both mine.
I'm shocked.
You're shocked. Yes, I know. The practical, honestly, uh, commitment to change, full stop. Commitment to changing your patterns, and commitment to breaking the cycle. And what I mean by that is we get in these patterns in life. Alarm clock goes off the same time every morning. Make a cup of coffee, drive to work the same way, go to the same desk, sort of have the same types of meetings over and over again, come home and do the same sort of thing. And that same pattern in our activities leads to a patterning of the mind where suddenly, 80% of our thoughts are the same the day before, and we're just ruminating on it. Um, when we put in a new commitment, we're putting a commitment to break the routine and change something. And the repetition of this commitment starts telling the body and the mind it's time to change. So our body and our minds adopt these rigid postures in order to make it through the day and survive. But the repetition of a new commitment allows the body to relax and accept that change is going to happen and be open to change, both mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I also often say too, it becomes this act of self-love because as we're committing to do something that may be a little bit challenging, the body and the mind say, hey, I'm worth it. We're doing something different. We're trying to change something. And there's all this focus being placed on me. Okay. I'm feeling this self-love and self-respect. And that's going to get me into the metaphysical reason. And I'm sort of stealing the framework from Kundalini yoga. It's called the 7 stages of happiness, but I'm going to relate to them in my own way. So there's 7 stages to happiness in this paradigm. And the first one is commitment and commitment to a daily practice, but it can be any repetitive commitment. And the idea here, it doesn't matter where your starting point is in life. It could be low, it could be high, is you're taking on this challenge to do something new, that's something good for yourself. If it's a little bit hard and takes you out of your comfort zone, that's a good thing. And just that commitment itself to show up for yourself every single day and keep doing it, whether you want to or not, takes you to the second stage that's called character. You start amassing some small wins. You start recognizing that you can accomplish these things. You can do these things. You can overcome these things. This is hard and you're doing something different. And as that happens, your character builds and you start being able and willing to take on some of the other pieces of your character and take responsibility for them. And over time, that starts to build. And as that builds, other people start to notice the changes going on with you. Other people start to see what you're doing and start to feel you're a bit of a role model. And you feel that too. And that's where dignity comes in. Suddenly you're from your commitment, your character's building. Now there's a dignity showing up. Like you feel important to other people and other people see you as important. In fact, your dignity is when you act like a god for another in a metaphysical standpoint. And from this place where you're feeling the
Can I stop you for
yeah
a second? Because I'm almost having a reaction to what you just said, and I imagine that some of our listeners may as well. What do you mean being a god for another
well, that's
person?
the wrong word. A role model. Sorry, a role model for other people. Yeah, you're becoming a role model for other people. They're looking at you like that. Oh, I see this person doing this thing. I want to mirror them, or I want to have respect for them.
And then when you say importance, like you become important to another person, are you speaking about your own significance or are you
Yeah.
speaking about something else?
Yeah, your own significance. You're feeling important to other people. You're feeling important to yourself
So I
because
think
you're being,
that's key.
yeah, because you're being recognized in the eyes of other people. And the key part is you're feeling it, sensing it, not necessarily hearing it. You're feeling it. It's a lived experience. I feel my dignity. I walk into this room and I feel dignified in the presence of other people because you've built your character up this way.
Okay.
Good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Thanks.
And from this place of this, as this dignity develops, we start to tap into what we refer to as our divinity. This is this idea that we're not separate. We're not alone. We're connected to something bigger, and we're starting to feel that through other people, through ourselves. And we're starting to get this sense of surrender at this stage where I don't necessarily have to control everything. I don't have to be in fear. It's going to be okay. And the more we continue with a commitment to the practice, that turns into what we'll call grace. And that's this real understanding. Not only I'm not separate, I'm actually part of everything. I'm connected to everything and anything. And I can surrender more deeply. I can fully take my hand off the wheel and just enjoy the experience of life. I'm not alone in this. And there's a greater creative intelligence that's operating here that's quite benevolent. And when we really start to fall into that place and recognize that we're part of a oneness, you know, you and I are fully connected. We're connected with our audience. We're connected with Earth. What I do for you, I do for me. It's better to give than to receive. Um, everything I put out comes back. It pushes in this place of sacrifice. We're willing to be in selfless service to others. We forgive. We don't judge, and that's the place of happiness. And it all, as Yogi Bhajan, who brought Kundalini Yoga to North America, says, commitment is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's all about staying within this commitment. And over time, over 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, I certainly, I talk about myself, I felt myself rise up this ladder to this place of happiness. And that's how I relate to why daily practice and why commitment works. I've fully embraced and experienced coming off this very low place where I was in a river of shame with very little self-respect, no dignity, to this place where I'm in, a happiness that I think eludes many people out there.
It's interesting how we see the world so differently, but ultimately actually say the same thing. Because I heard so much in your words. I never would have spoken what daily practice is in the way that you did. And yet I can completely relate to some of what you spoke. So, yeah. My experience with it is really different.
Mm.
And I feel like I could say so many things about daily practice, and I could probably sit and do 6 podcasts on it. But I think there's 2 things that I want to say about why it works from my experience and from the experience of the people that my community has served. And that is, daily practice wakes up our witness consciousness. So it wakes up the observer in us.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? Well, most of the time we go through life and we are in reaction to everything around us without even being aware of it. We're in a reactive mode. We're in a constant stress response. And I don't even think that most of us really know what the experience of having a quiet nervous system really even means. Daily practice and the act of showing up for ourselves day after day in whatever fashion we choose has us sitting with ourselves. And in sitting with ourselves through writing or breathing or movement, we start to see ourselves, and we start to see our reactions and our reactivity. We start to see and experience our thoughts. We start to see and experience what's happening in our bodies. And in being able to wake up that witness consciousness, what happens is that over time, we get to a place where we recognize that we have choice. And that choice is, I have an opportunity to pause before I react. And I get to choose what happens next. I develop a sense of agency in myself in the process. So what that might look like is, at the beginning, let's say it's you and me, and we have a conversation, and I react poorly to you, and I get all my defenses come up and my armor comes up. And for me, that natural posture is my heart shuts down and I get kind of icy. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I can notice in before I really engaged deeply in daily practice, that was just a reflex. As daily practice became more and more a part of my life, I started to notice when I did it. The more practice became a part of my life, the shorter the time frame became between when I noticed that I did it, when I did it, and when I noticed that I did it. And then over more time, what happened is that I would notice that I was about to do it. And I got to actually pause and say, do I really want to shut my heart down in this moment? Is it going to serve me? A very sweet and wise teacher of mine named Michael Talbot Kelly introduced me to the idea of Freedom Mountain. For a long time, I didn't understand what he meant by it until one day I did. And Freedom Mountain is this place of choice, this place where I have enough mastery over my own nervous system that I get to choose whether I move into something that's life negating or life affirming. And that choice gives me freedom. And sometimes I choose life negating because I feel like it. But at least I know that I'm making the choice to do so.
So can I want to just pause there because I want to ask you this question. It showed up for me. Absent the developing of this witness consciousness, do you have choice?
Before that,
Yeah.
no.
You're just reacting. You're almost mechanical.
You're just constantly reacting. Our systems are so triggered by our lifestyles.
I think it's really important to understand.
Yeah. And it's insanity, actually. Mm-hmm. I think it's why the world looks the way the world looks, because actually, I think that on a deeper level, what's happening is that whatever core wounding I might have in myself, and we all have our own version of it, the moment that that happened, I entered into survival. Mm-hmm. And I put my nervous system was put into survival mode. And then everything I do helps me to protect that piece of me. And so my whole life ends up becoming a constant reaction. And my lifestyle supports that, right? Not my lifestyle, but not anymore. Anyways.
Stylized lifestyle, yeah.
Our eating habits, our exercise habits, our sleeping habits, the way in which we interact with each other, all of those things end up affecting our nervous systems in a way that keep us in a stress response. And so the witness consciousness, as that develops, what happens is that I get to actually begin to stop, pause, and move my nervous system into a parasympathetic state, which is more of a relaxed and healing response.
Yeah.
The other piece of daily practice that I really want to speak to that's significant, and I think that it's something that takes time to get to. And I would say to you, I taught a daily practice for 3.5 years. And lots of beautiful things happened for me personally through that teaching and for my community in the process. But it was only in stopping that daily practice and being with myself fully that I really came to a visceral understanding of what daily practice is really about. And that is, daily practice is an opportunity for us to learn how to be with discomfort. And discomfort is the very thing that we avoid being with and run from our entire lives. The act of daily practice is an act of turning toward ourselves and being with the things that we've avoided being with because they're too scary. And which means that from my perspective, daily practice is actually a warrior practice. Jeff Foster wrote a poem called How I Became a Warrior, and it was all about turning toward yourself. And I think the interesting piece in that is that we're not taught how to be with our own discomfort. We're taught how to step out of ourselves and get into the practice of doing, which we're then given accolades for. And in the process, our nervous systems are so exhausted that not only are we not capable of being with our discomfort, but our inability to be with our discomfort then has us acting in ways in the outside world where we are constantly either defending ourselves because we don't know how to be with ourselves or blaming people around us. And so we create war. Warriorship, as I'm coming to understand it more and more deeply, looks like being able to turn toward ourselves and the places where we're warring with ourselves and actually learn how to be with them and meet them with tenderness and acknowledgement and respect. And for me, that's the essence of daily practice.
And what I hear you saying is, it's like, again, you alluded to it earlier. It's in a sense what you've described is you're turning from facing the outside to turning inward. And we're conditioned to fight off the external enemies in a certain sense. All these things that are coming to, to attack us. And I visualize, society or people walking on this balance beam, and anytime the wind blows or something happens, they're constantly trying to fight it so they don't fall off because they're just not on this safe ground. But it's turning inward is where the work is to make it so I'm not walking on a balance beam. I have the earth beneath my feet. I'm not going to get knocked over by any of these things, provided I have that witness consciousness shows up and I'm not reactive. I'm choosing how I want to respond to the situation. And that, linking it back to the warrior, that takes a tremendous act of courage to be willing to face our own limitations, our own defects, our own fears, and our own limiting beliefs. Because in a sense, we have been running away from those things our entire lives. And some people call it the shadow. We don't want to look at those things because we've rejected them. We don't want to believe those things are part of us. But the work we're talking about is saying, no, they've always been part of me. And my lack of awareness in them means they've actually been driving all my behaviors my entire life. So I have to step in. I have to look at it and say, that's me. I'm capable of all of these things. And now I need to integrate it.
Yeah. And I think, from my perspective, you use words like defects of character as an example. And I think that I would look at it a little bit differently. I think at the heart of what it is we're avoiding is the heart of that is fear. And it's not about the defects of character that you're speaking to, actually are the masks that we end up wearing.
Absolutely. The expression.
To protect that scared little person. And that daily practice is an opportunity to sort of watch those masks begin to slough away.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, there's an analogy of the artichoke. People used to talk about peeling the layers of the onion, and what was at the heart of it was just tears. And I love the analogy of the artichoke because when we look at an artichoke, you peel the layers away, and what's at the center of the artichoke? What's the heart?
Mm-hmm.
And that is this process, is the practice of showing up for yourself consistently, day in and day out, actually builds trust in the body to give us access to something that we wouldn't have access to if we didn't show up as somebody trustworthy enough to hold that little person. And I think that that is the magic of daily practice, is that what actually happens is that by showing up for ourselves repeatedly over and over and over again, is that we actually become the trusted person, that the part of us that is sort of terrified to show itself when we were really young, mm-hmm. becomes able to show itself to us. And we become a container for that emotion or little person because of the container that daily practice creates for us. Do you see? Practice isn't just about showing up and doing a practice. The art of daily practice is that it creates a container to hold us in so that we have the ability to explore our emotions, our feelings, our reactions, our experiences, and gives us an opportunity to sort of to be with them.
And I think and so true. And I think just for our listeners, you don't need to intellectually understand all that stuff. I think what we're saying is what's required is simply to show up and do a daily practice. That other stuff will reveal itself. It'll just happen over time. Over time, the witness consciousness shows up. Over time, you start becoming aware of how you're acting in the world. Over time, you'll start to realize, God, I'm driven by fear. And over time, I realize those fears are deep rooted in these limiting beliefs I have about myself. Maybe like, I'm not enough. I'm not worthy of love. God, that's been driving everything my entire life. And I haven't been able to see it. It just comes back to that saying, know thyself. So simple, but it's the one thing that most people will spend their entire lives not doing. No idea who they are.
Yeah. And then the behaviors that we do to mask that are they're incredible. I mean, it's incredible to watch what we'll do to ourselves to avoid feeling. So one thing that I want to share is, daily practice can look like so many different things. The technology itself that you use, so whether you're using meditation and a specific form of meditation or a specific form of breath work, each one of those technologies, different forms of journaling, there's so many different ways to practice and so much out there of every expert and their mother telling you what to do. What I would suggest is that you find something that you can commit to and begin slowly, baby steps. Your body builds trust in increments. So take baby steps. You don't need to jump into the deep end to do this. This is a lifelong process. And so begin somewhere. Begin with 5 minutes of breathing. Begin with 5 minutes of sitting and looking outside. If you want guidance on what to do, you can call us anytime. We're happy to have the conversation. It's one of our favorite things to talk about. But just begin slowly and give yourself permission to wade in the water as you figure out what works for you.
And I wanted to just on that in terms of like the practicalities of it, what's weaved through our last 2 episodes, this idea of like, a community practice or a solo practice. And there's this like, should I be the yogi in the cave or the cult of the commune? And I'm joking about it, but it's like, there's these, what's the right approach? And I think when I was sitting with that, it's like, for me, the solo practice is so critical for me to being that witness consciousness. I need that quiet time where it's just me versus me, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I'm sitting on that cushion for half an hour and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to let the stuff come up and I'm just going to be with it. But I also needed the community, because if I'm going through this process of transformation, I'm not understanding myself. I'm a bit lost. Others may not be understanding me. I needed the safety of that community that has an understanding and appreciation of what I'm doing. Maybe many in that community I walk this path and can share with me, but I needed that feeling of safety. This shows up in the recovery space where someone can go do the 12 steps with one other person, and that's great. It'll be effective. but there's a whole group of people that have already done them and are gonna hold space for you while you go through the rigor, the whole roller coaster ride of emotions as you process that stuff. And so I want to say there's argument for both.
I think there's a time and a place for both. And whatever's going to get you started is where you begin. Because one of the biggest challenges about beginning is moving from thinking about starting and stepping in and just starting. So whatever's going to get you into action is where you begin. And then give yourself permission to surrender to the process and watch where it takes you. We are figuring it out with you. You're not on your own. This is a daily, literally a daily practice for us. And our practices have changed over time and continue to shift and grow as we continue to shift and grow. Please reach out to us anytime. This is a passion for both of us in our own ways. And we are so happy to walk with you if it serves.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And I'm going to close with this. A commitment to a daily practice literally saved my life. It was instrumental in treating a number of mental health issues I had that have simply dissolved in many sense, in many ways. And quite frankly, I think it goes deeper than that for me. It's really opened the door to living a life and relating to the experience of what I'll call the great mystery in a way that I'd never thought possible. And effectively, I'm going to go stronger. Committing to a discipline, I think, is the absolute most powerful tool that we all have in our toolbox. And many people never take it out and they never use it. Use it. Take it out. And just as Jacqueline said, I want to reiterate, you don't need to do life alone. You don't need to do this alone. Asking for help is a sign of strength. It takes courage to accept your limitations and face them. And it takes courage to change. So reach out. There's so many people here to help you, including us. And with that, any last words?
No, I think that covers it for now.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.